Gotta make sure it's framed up just right. Hey guys, it's Ryan. I just wanted to make a quick video today about some tips for setting up your cars for AstroTurf racing. Today I'm going to go over the B60 and the B64, my personal cars, and how I set them up, and more importantly, why I was setting them up that way. So if you need to do something different, you'll understand how to achieve that result to suit your driving style.
Take the chance and explore. Thought I was more than the afterlife. Thought I was more than you hit the edge of your desire. Left a story unsolved. Thought I was more than the afterlife. Thought I was more than
When it comes to AstroTurf racing, I'm fairly new to it, and I'm still figuring it out myself. But I've learned a lot of stuff that you guys might find useful on your end as well. AstroTurf racing, there is a tremendous amount of grip. And what I found myself doing immediately, and everyone else that was there at the track with me, was trying to dial out traction or slow down the responsiveness of the car so that it became drivable. The issue that you face is with AstroTurf, the car, you're trying to get it on the edge of where it's about to traction roll, or it feels like it's about to traction roll, but doesn't. A lot of times if you bring a dirt setup directly into AstroTurf and then you go out and run the car, the suspension is way too responsive and it has too much mechanical grip and things like that. And what ends up happening is you'll drive the car into a corner and it just traction rolls. And it's very frustrating because you're trying to go fast, but you can't because it keeps flipping over. So what do? The first thing you'll notice is that the ride height of the car is very low compared to what you might run for other tracks. What this does is very simple. You're lowering the center of gravity so that you can maintain a higher speed in the corners. The ride height that I'm running and all of the details on my setup are going to be in the setup sheet linked in the description below, and you can just plug them in accordingly. But if you find yourself having a different car, I still want to give you information that will be helpful and hopefully will translate into whatever platform you're using. The next step that I would say that you're going to do is, typically speaking, in at least outdoor off-road racing and some indoor dirt tracks, you may run a stand-up transmission configuration in your two-wheel drive buggy. This is definitely not the way to go on AstroTurf. You must run a laydown transmission configuration. All it does is it takes the motor and the gearbox and it moves it forward and a little bit higher so that you can run the lower ride height and keep the dog bones at the correct angle. This will put the weight where you want it, it will rotate the car properly, and it will help it from traction rolling and gaining too much rear bite. You'll notice that on a lot of outdoor setups and dirt setups, the rear end of the car has a lot of toe in. On this track, I put a little bit less of that, and it's a very neutral position where I put my hinge pin inserts. I pointed the arms a little bit more straight and kept the tires a little bit more straight than I typically would. I run very little toe out on the front end on my four-wheel drive car, and it's very standard on my two-wheel drive car. I keep the toe at a neutral position as well. Camber is about the same. I run about 1 degree or 1.5 degrees inward on front and rear in both the two-wheel drive and the four-wheel drive buggies. For the two-wheel drive buggy, as far as weight distribution, it's very different than how I run it for a dirt configuration. I took all of the weight out of the rear hinge pin braces or any other weights that I had back there, and I put it all in the front of the car. I ran the 30 or 33 gram front bulkhead weight, and then I also put weight under the servo plate, and I put weight under the electronics plate. Basically, what I was trying to get the car to do is get all the weight off of the rear end so that it would keep it from biting and grabbing and traction rolling back there, and it would allow it to rotate quickly because it put most of the weight in the front of the car and it allowed it to snap around very quickly. What I noticed in AstroTurf racing is guys weren't running necessarily a very sweeping open line like you might in a lot of dirt racing. Instead, they were driving the car straight from point to point. And what that meant was you wanted it to be able to do a 180-degree turn as fast as possible and not traction roll. So putting all the weight at least in the center of the car and a little bit extra in the front on the two-wheel drive buggy, it allowed it to do that quick snapping rotation when you were going from corner to corner. As far as shock packages go, both cars, two-wheel drive and four-wheel drive, were a lot stiffer and a lot slower. Ran a lot thicker oil, I ran smaller piston holes, and I ran stiffer springs. I played around with sway bars, front and rear on both cars. I ended up keeping both sway bars on the four-wheel drive buggy, the stiffest ones possible, and I ended up running on the two-wheel drive buggy, I ran a sway bar in the front, and it was a fairly light sway bar and no sway bar on the rear. I really liked the way the car felt, but some people do play around with a sway bar in the rear on the two-wheel drive buggy as well. AstroTurf is very aggressive on ball diffs. I played around with a few in the two-wheel drive buggy, and I was constantly having to just rebuild it with almost all new parts every single time. I couldn't get a ball diff to last and be consistent enough more than one run. So I think I speak for most people when I say a gear diff in the two-wheel drive buggy is an absolute must. I personally ran a few times. I ran it at 6K, and then I ran it at 7K, and I ended up leaving it at a 7K diff weight fluid. So one of the key general ideas when you're setting up a car for AstroTurf is you're trying to get the car to become a little less responsive, get it to slow down, because when it's super responsive, you're gonna traction roll everywhere, it'll become very unpredictable, it'll be hard to drive. So what a lot of people are trying to do is just get the car to be a little bit lazier in its responsiveness to compensate for the tremendous amounts of response that's coming out of the grip in the track itself. Having said that, a lot of this can be done through tire selection. Now, this is something where I actually saw a lot of drivers going back and forth between the two. These two tires here, the one with the larger pins that are more spaced out, they were much easier to drive. The car was a little bit more consistent, and it was a little bit more of an enjoyable experience. The other tires were great, and they provided a lot of forward bite, but they were also a little bit more edgy. It was a little bit harder to drive the car and get those super fast lap times every single lap because it kind of kept the car more on edge. It was easier to get it to traction roll than with the other tires. What else? Now, this isn't necessarily a setup for the car itself, but the components that are in the car, namely the motor. This is probably very subjective to the track that you're going to, but I think that the principle will apply to some degree regardless of what astro or carpet track that you're going to find yourself in. Because of the very high bite situation, when the car is under acceleration, it doesn't really have the ability to bleed power as easily as it would on a dirt track. But what this ends up doing is it puts a little bit more stress on the motor. So you'll probably see motor temps increase if you haven't changed this at all, going from a standard dirt setup to this setup. Now, if you come from a very high bite track, this may not be as big of an issue. But for someone like myself, where I find myself racing in a little bit dustier or looser conditions, bringing that setup over here, I did encounter a problem of the motors being too hot. I had them geared too high, and I had a little bit too much timing in the motor. So I went down on both of them considerably versus how I would normally have it set up for a dirt track. As far as the diff weights in the four-wheel drive buggy, if you have fluid diffs in your buggy, I think that most people were running fairly high diff weights. I personally was running 15K in the front and 10K in the rear. I was running a fluid diff in the center of my B64 for two reasons. One, because I don't have a slipper, and two, I am running a puck system on my B64 to reduce weight as much as I possibly could. Without the puck system, it was a little difficult to get my car down to the 1600-ish gram range that is controlled in the 13.5 four-wheel drive buggy class. So one of the ways that I did that was I put in the MIP puck system and boom, shaved off a ton of weight. And with the way that that setup comes now, you have to run the fluid diff in the center because you can't put the puck system on the slipper assembly as far as I know. This may change in the future, but as of now, I can't do that. I have to run a gear diff in the center. Oh, and the fluid in that, I was running 500,000 weight fluid. It's super stiff. I think that's about all the setup tips that I have. And again, I wanted to kind of break down the ideology that goes into the setups that I have linked down below. So that way, if you have a different car, you might be able to carry some of this information over to the platform that you have. Or again, be able to use this concept of setup for the driving style that you have, because it might be different than mine. So I hope you find this helpful. I hope you guys liked the video. If you're looking for more content like this coming out in the future, I will make some more. So please sub if you haven't. And that's it for today. So I'll see you guys next time.